Hi guys, it's Shane again, and today I would like to debunk the Formula One myth that I hate the most of the many myths surrounding the sport that I love. Now, the myth in question is the long-running story that the FIA favoured Alain Prost in his legendary battles with Ayrton Senna in the late 1980s at McLaren, and later on with Prost in the Ferrari in the in 1990. Now, there are many things that people bring up on this, and we'll be going through a few of these points and explaining why they are ridiculous. So, starting off with why people believe it, the first one that people go to is that Senna was disqualified unfairly in 1989 to hand Prost the world title. This is pretty ridiculous. Senna gained the advantage in 1989 and was disqualified as a result. And the way that people blame Prost for that crash as well, realistically, at worst, that's a racing incident between two teammates racing each other hard. If you want to blame someone, you're blaming Senna for trying to yeet one up the inside from half a second back. It's amazing how people are very quick to apportion blame to the driver who hits the driver they prefer, and I'll go more into that later with another example. Now, the next one, and this is one that I've heard constantly, and it's amazing how many people actually believe this, is that the FIA moved pole position onto the dirty side of the grid at Suzuka in 1990 to screw Senna. This is a lie. The pole position had always been on the dirty side of the grid at Suzuka every single year, but the one year Senna made a song and dance about it, the story went around that the FIA had moved it. This has never been the case. I've seen this in comment sections, in threads on Reddit. I've even seen people in YouTube videos say that this is something that they bring up as to why Senna could justify yeeting Prost off the track at over 130 miles an hour in front of 24 other cars. Right? Senna was massively into his driver safety, yet he was willing to do stuff like that, which put not only himself in danger, but the other 25 drivers on the grid, plus all of the fans, the marshals that could have been injured by flying debris. That is ridiculous, and people genuinely think that because the FIA favoured Prost and because Prost took Senna out the previous year, this is okay. And this is another thing that proves that the FIA did not favour Prost. Realistically, we saw Schumacher excluded from the 1997 season for attempting a similar move on Jacques Villeneuve. Ayrton Senna should have been disqualified from the season for that collision at Suzuka in 1990. That was blatantly wiping out his title rival. And for all the legacy Senna has, he was an incredibly talented driver. He was more than willing to play dirty. And there were a few drivers on the grid that didn't play his game of, here is my car, move or crash, and they were Prost and Mansell. Senna regularly put himself in a position where if the other car didn't simply disappear, there would be crashes. It happened at Monza in 1988, which is why McLaren didn't win every race that year, because while lapping a back marker, Senna took a line that required the Williams to just evaporate. And then later in 89 at Suzuka, he had that collision with Prost where he went for a dive bomb that required Prost to just make allowances for Senna attempting a stupid move. And then in 1990, he just ran into the back of his main title rival. So Senna did a lot of questionable stuff and got away with a lot of questionable stuff on track, not to mention his numerous run-ins with Nigel Mansell and other drivers where he would put himself in a position where the other driver had to get out of the way or there would be a collision involving both cars. So no, you can't really say that the FIA favoured Prost in either of those years, and you really can't say that about the grid position being moved, it really bugs me that people still believe that. And so much of it starts with, well, I watched the Senna documentary. Wonderful, right? You watch the Senna documentary, which is heavily censored by the Senna family and deliberately made Prost and Balestri out to be the bad guys so that it would increase the hero worship of a man who died in motorsport. Senna's been mythologized in a way by the fact that he died in a Formula One car, because it's always been the greatest, well, what if he'd survived? Irrelevant of the what if, the Senna we had on track was more than willing to drive dirty. And that was just a fact that would follow him. And the Senna documentary made it go out of their way to patch over all of those things, to make Prost and Balestri out to be the bad guys in the situation and make it look like Senna was cruelly robbed of a world title. In a way, someone else who was robbed by a world title of rules at the time was Alain Prost in '88. Prost scored more points that season, but the dropped score system, which was dropped in 1991, gave Senna the world title. So realistically, if we're going to go there, Prost should maybe be a 6-time world champion and Senna only have the one, because Prost was better over the season and a more consistent scorer over the season than Ayrton Senna was. Prost had a few mechanical failures. Senna crashed twice while unchallenged in the lead. Once at Monaco and once at Spain. That's pushing your luck a little bit if you want to be world champion. To throw away what at the time I think was 9 points just out of nowhere. He was under no pressure at Monaco and he stacked it, and he was under no pressure in Monza and he decided to pick a fight with a Williams that he was lapping. Moving on, with the collisions, people are very quick to apportion blame to the driver they like the least in the collision, and the best example of that in modern times is the clash between George Russell and Valtteri Bottas at Imola this year. Now, again, this is at best a racing incident. This is the worst case scenario I could say for this. This is a racing incident. This is two drivers racing hard and they collided. If anyone is going to be thrown blame at this, it is being thrown at George Russell, because he is the one that was making the move and he made the mistake that caused the accident. People have thrown blame at Bottas, and the question I ask here is, how quickly would you be willing to throw blame at Bottas and not Russell if it had been Bottas on the outside that had taken out Russell? The reason people would like, oh no, it wasn't Russell's fault, is because Russell is a golden boy. Everybody loves George Russell, and Bottas is just so easy for people to throw stick at. Yes, Bottas moved across the track. You are allowed to do that. He moved left to take a defensive position and then glided back over to the right to take the racing line, which is permitted within the rules, and he left plenty of space for that Williams. George then chose to go out onto the wet side of the track and dropped it on a wet track on slicks. That is a driving error from George Russell. Bringing that back to the 1989 collision, Alain Prost moved to take the racing line through the Suzuka chicane. At the time, Senna saw the gap and should have asked himself, is that gap going to be there when I arrive at the corner? And the answer to that question was always going to be no. He went for a gap that wasn't going to exist. He expected Prost to move out of his way, which isn't a way you can go about it. It's not similar to the way that Daniel Ricciardo does it. The way Senna made that move, Prost wasn't going to turn in and find himself staring at a wall of McLaren instead of the apex. He was going to get hit in the side by his teammate, which is exactly what happened. And then in 1990, that is really cut and dry. That is just Senna wiping out his title rival out of spite, out of small-mindedness. Pick your reason for whatever, but don't try and justify it by saying, oh, he was angry that the FIA really favoured Prost and Balestri favoured Prost to favour another Frenchman, because that's just not true. It's just ridiculous. This is one of those myths that for some reason hasn't gone away in over 30 years since it happened. And in those 30 years, that's been plenty of time for the FIA to retrospectively say, well, Senna probably should have been disqualified and had that title scrubbed, but they won't do it because it will tarnish his legacy, and it would be disrespectful to the memory of someone who tragically passed away in the car. But it really should have happened at the time. What Senna did that day was dangerous, and the fact that he was allowed to remain in racing could be seen as the FIA favouring Senna rather than favouring Prost. The fact that Senna had his little crying fit and threatened to retire over the collision and the backlash from it shows how very much he had this siege mentality where it was him against the world. But people love him for that in the same way that they hate Jose Mourinho in football for having the same mentality. Senna was very much, everyone is my enemy, no one is my friend, and that's why he had these collisions, he had these outbursts, and I understand that that's why people like him, and he had immense talent, but you can't claim Prost won the 89 title because Senna was shafted by the FIA. Senna was shafted by reliability that season, that I'll give you, but he wasn't shafted by the sports governing body. I don't think this story is ever going to go away. I don't think this myth is ever going to go away. It's one of those ones that has been around forever and is going to remain around forever, a lot like the ex-driver I don't like is successful because he's in the fastest car. Yeah, of course they are. No one won in a Minardi, you idiot. But I'd like to think that my facts have said it's very clear the FIA didn't favour Alain Prost. Especially the one that really grates me, as I've said, is they moved pole position to the dirty side of the grid. They didn't. Alright, anyone who says that's a liar, or they're misinformed. Best case scenario, misinformed. Worst case scenario, actually vindictively lying to prove their own argument. The pole position at Suzuka was always on the inside line, on the dirty side of the grid. From 1986, I believe was the debut, or 87, all the way through to that 1990 clash. But the year it became a problem, Senna kicked up a fuss about it, and people who wanted to fight Senna's corner and paint Prost and Balestri as the bad guys used that as ammunition to do so. It was never the case. The bias was never thrown either way between the two. Like, you can't say either side got bias from the FIA. They stayed really neutral in it all. Senna was disqualified for a reason in 1989, and then for some reason not disqualified from 1990, but that's an entirely different topic. So I hope this has helped you understand why this myth is ridiculous. If you still believe that the FIA favour Prost, please let me know down in the comments why you believe so, and we will have a conversation about it, and I will attempt to understand more from why people believe this. Until next time, I have been Shane Nye, and thank you for watching.